Economic growth is down since the budget. Unemployment is up since the budget. London's prized property market, the prices are decreasing since the budget when Rachel Reeves increased taxes. But rather than maybe row back on that, the Chancellor has actually refused to rule out maybe increasing taxes again next year, despite the uproar over young, hard-working people leaving our country and millionaires leaving our country, taking their assets and their money and their wealth creation with them. Now, rumours are also abounding that Ed Miliband, the Energy Secretary, fancies his chances as potentially replacing her as Chancellor of the Exchequer. Another story which has just come out is that foreign takeovers of Britain's assets, our companies, have shot up by 74% in a year. Deals now account for $142 billion. Does Britain want to be a country with no companies of its own? Does Britain want to be a country where everything else is owned by everyone else? Well, Justin Urquhart Stewart joins me now to discuss all of this. Thank you so much for joining me.
Great pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for asking.
So we've recently had some GDP figures that out. Unfortunately, GDP growth is down from 0.2%, which was pretty meagre anyway, to 0.1%. The household savings ratio, which I think is a good indicator of individuals' economic health, is down 0.7 percentage points, which is actually quite big, really, when you consider how much the average person might have saved. And unemployment is up to 5.1%, which is not far off the COVID high of 5.3%. All of these measures are figures are slightly out of kilter with what was going on before Labour came into power. So do you think that the fault for this lies at Labour's door?
Increasingly, as months go by, the excuse of saying we were left a black hole and it's their problem, which we're now trying to sort out. I'm afraid it's been too long now. A lot of it is Labour's fault because they haven't taken the right action to actually start seeing the economy change, or in their view, grow. And the reason that they're not achieving this, frankly, I don't think they've got the right knowledge. And look at the front bench. There's no business expertise there, economic expertise, which has any track record at all. And we all know the slightly concerning CV of the Chancellor. So all of that means actually Labour, I'm afraid, have to take a lot of the blame for this now. You've had time to get things going. And actually saying we've got growth of, naught effectively. And it's pointless saying you're the fastest growing against the others. They're all growing very slowly. It's a snail race, which is not an excuse to sit there and say there's nothing we can do. There is a huge amount they can try and do, actually, to get that vital word of confidence in the economy, so the consumers will actually go out and spend, investors will be investing, and more to the point, external investors see Britain as a good place to invest in. At the moment, they can't see that. And so universally, if you ask anybody who's looking at the UK, it'll be a question of confidence. I don't trust what's going on at the moment, so I'll put my money elsewhere.
Labour are bragging about the fact that the interest rate is now down to 3.75%, but isn't that normally a sign of a weak economy?
Yeah, I mean, we've got the interest rates coming down like that, at that level. It's having very little effect. You start saying, well, it's going to be cheaper in terms of mortgages. Well, actually, not that many people, as a proportion to our economy, actually have mortgages. More people actually don't have mortgages. And also, they have fixed rate mortgages. So you actually cut the rate. I'm afraid until they actually change their mortgage, they're not going to see any benefit from that at all. So I'm afraid they're fooling themselves with it. And also, when you're actually just cutting interest rates on its own, unless it's tied to other things in terms of actually helping further investment, then I'm afraid it's just going to be seen as almost as a rounding error, albeit a bit more positive. I'm afraid now what you need to be able to have is not just cheaper money, that's not going to have such an effect, but policies which are going to be seen to be growing an economy. And this does not mean the government actually spending money. There are lots of tax breaks that can be used to encourage investors. We've spoken before about things like enterprise investment schemes and for larger companies and smaller companies, being able to put this regionally as well, not just in the UK. We've got all the tech companies there and tech hubs and the breaks that can be given for them. Again, tax breaks, not government money, because the government doesn't have any money. All those things, just taking that action will give people confidence to say, oh, well, they're doing something, something's changing. Also, how many members of the government have actually come up with figures saying we're still setting up new businesses. People are still actually investing. They don't put any good news out there, and it is there to be seen. There's another interesting sort of a little fact, and that is you look at the countries investing, the markets investing in their own economies. So if you go to the United States, it's over 60, 70% actually goes into American businesses. Well, that's America is its own world. But even if you go to France and Germany, you'll find higher proportion of pension money actually going into local companies. Here, it's 6%. Tiny amounts. So we know the money's there. It's not being directed into the area, which can have almost immediate impact in terms of actually helping businesses grow and develop in this country. So what you've got is
Why is that, Justin? Do you know?
well, because, well, first of all, the reason that so little money is invested directly into the United Kingdom is A, some of the markets are inefficient anyway. You've got the smaller companies market like AIM, which is illiquid and expensive at the moment. It's not attracting new companies coming into it or comes out investors. And also, when you actually look at what people have been investing in, they tend to invest in a nice broad portfolio of different asset classes and geographically spread around the world, all of which is perfectly sensible. But actually, no one has actually said, but what about actually having a greater focus on the United Kingdom? And actually saying, well, I've seen this say local authority pension schemes, and said to them, how much of your money, of your pensioners' money, actually goes into local businesses in, say, as this particular conversation was with Birmingham, and the answer is they didn't know. And when we did actually show them, and it came out at under 10%, they were astonished. I said, well, look, well done for looking after people's pensions. But as a pensioner with you in Birmingham, I would like to think actually some of my money's going into the local community, not for charity, but actually to help it grow. These are simple things which can be done easily. It doesn't need you to have changed legislation, doesn't need to take government money. The money's already there.
Well, we kept hearing earlier this year that Rachel Reeves wanted to do just that. She wanted to copy the Australian super fund and get pensioners' money to help grow UK businesses. But then the budget came out, and instead she penalised those saving for a pension.
Yeah, I mean, that's utter madness, isn't it? Spent years trying to encourage people to save, to look after themselves and not have to fall back in their retirement back on the state because the state hasn't got any money to do so. So you need to encourage people to be saving a lot more and understanding it. So that comes back to the education of it. But then what she should have been doing is saying, right, you don't actually have to mandate that actually the money has to go into certain companies, but you can actually say it in terms of advising for pension trustees that they should be looking to have a greater percentage. Is it 10? Is it 20% investing in domestic companies? It's, or you don't even have to make it compulsory. Just tell people, actually, here is an alternative, and this is what trees should be looking at, and it'll have, again, a direct impact in the short term.
See, yeah, when we speak, a lot of what you talk about is not so much that the government needs more money. It's more that they need to change the incentive structure. They need to
But
help businesses grow. And
well, add to that,
Rachel,
there's one other bit with it, which is again the using some imagination, which again has been talked about to enhance the tax system to encourage more money to coming in and be investing. And you remember the Tories were going on about getting rid of stamp duty, which had been talked about a lot before. Why is that seen as something which has been so negative when in fact you want people to be moving house? If you move house, you spend more money going through the system, more tax being earned, the economy moves faster. Stamp duty was actually introduced so that dear old King Billy back in the 17th century could pay for his war against the French, the Dutch war against the French, not even the British. And so we find ourselves with old-fashioned stamp duty, which should have been changed and developed, but the people in power don't have the knowledge as to how to change it and why. And then you may say, well, it's down to the Treasury, but they don't know either. Why? Because the old expertise of who've been sitting there, had a career in the Treasury for generations, that's changed. They have modern HR policies now. So you spend 3 years in the Treasury, then you go to the Foreign Office, then you go to pensions. So they've lost, again, that knowledge and expertise. What we need to be able to do is bring in some business expertise and economic expertise to actually show how the government can move now without having to spend any money.
yeah, and to go back to the incentive issue, Rachel Reeves has raised taxes twice. She's now they were going on about how we had the fastest growing economy in the G7 earlier this year. They don't seem to understand that making that point also highlights the fact that it's dropped off a cliff. And she's now refusing to rule out raising taxes again. And
Yeah.
that tells me that she doesn't realise that her budget has contributed to our slowdown in growth.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even the budget. As you referred to earlier, the behaviour before the budget, where flags were being flown, kites being flown, and it was seen as being no proper planning, but rather a government sort of casting around for ideas. What it did was actually just give people the view that they can't trust the government, whether it's in the UK or not. These people don't know what they're doing. And so when you've had one budget, two budgets, both of which had elements where they increased taxation on employees by way of national insurance, and also in terms of in the last budget, actually, who's actually going to start paying more tax? The answer is the lowest paid. Even if you put up actually the minimum wage, because you've actually seen a freezing of the limits, actually the poorest people would be getting into tax now when otherwise they probably wouldn't have been in that position. So it's going against their own political thinking. And the only answer I can come up with that is they don't understand. I'm afraid these things don't have to be made that complicated. Break it down to different bits in terms of where are the new companies or the companies are developing, those tech companies. Where's the money? Well, we know it's in the pension funds and elsewhere. What areas of tax can we change simply without bankrupting ourselves? And where are those multipliers in the tax system whereby, as with stamp duty, you encourage people to move house and therefore you will spend more money on other things, which will then incur VAT. Therefore, you get more money running through the economy. Speed of money through the economy is one of the key measures for a successful economy. I'm afraid the government has no concept of this at all.
Well, when you say that, I think there's an interesting article in the Telegraph about how Ed Miliband reportedly gave economics lessons to Keir Starmer while they were in opposition because Keir Starmer, reportedly in this Telegraph article, didn't understand the difference between how the Tories approach economics and how Labour approach economics. What's your reaction to that? What does that say about our country that our leader potentially didn't understand the basic difference between the Tories and Labour?
I find it absolutely astounding. Surely, if you're a member of one party, at least you understand what your party stands for, and more to the point, actually what everyone else doesn't stand for. These are my key differences. Vote for me because I stand for this. Whereas at the moment, Labour are finding out that they don't know what to stand for. And so they're being beaten up by reform on one side, threats of people going to the left on the other side with the new, rather strange left-wing party there, which probably won't go very far, but it's doing enough to actually just to make sure the government is unnerved. It doesn't know what to do. It is the ubiquitous rabbit in the headlamps. So what do we do to try and do it? Good God, I need to try and get into number 11 to sit there and say, let's talk in simple terms about how you develop an economy. Suppose you were starting from scratch with your monopoly board. How would you develop it? And that's what I find frustrating. These things aren't very difficult. It's actually most of it's just common sense and logic. You don't have to be a PhD in economics to work it out. Frankly, how about running a domestic budget? That would actually tell you it. And also, and I think this is the bit that's most, I think, pathetic, is people going around just sort of saying it's broken, it's everybody else's fault, as opposed to actually focusing on the areas where, despite what's going on, actually there have been some positive areas here. And tell people more positive elements, and amazing how it changes people's attitude. I don't mean just give them more alcohol at Christmas, but actually telling them that there are successful businesses here. We're very good at setting up businesses. Let's help the taxation system support that, and let's actually make sure that the money is being invested in companies which we will be benefiting from. Take, for example, one key area like defence. We know that the world is going to be spending a huge amount more on defence. We used to have a lot of defence companies, we still do, but we're not hearing actually how successful some of those have been, and how we can grow that and what profile it's got. And again, gives you that feeling that actually all is not lost. It just needs proper education.
With that in mind, there's rumours that Labour are maybe pinning their hopes on replacing Rachel Reeves with Ed Miliband. What would your reaction to that be?
I would be absolutely horrified on the basis that we know from the statements of Ed Miliband that he doesn't understand what's going on either. When he's been talking about increasing the taxation, or actually just the attitude towards having wealth. And it is, the old, I suppose, socialist doctrine. What, wealth is bad. No, no, hang on a second. Create wealth gives you the opportunity to create more tax income. If you create tax and actually have more taxation, that doesn't create wealth. They've got it the wrong way round. So when you hear politicians today going on about let's soak the rich, maybe not using those terms anymore, but actually increasing taxation on the wealthy, we know actually increasingly that has a negative impact. And we know also, and people tend to sort of roll their eyes, we say people leave the country. Well, even if they don't, their money does. They go elsewhere. And it's not one of those silly pipe dreams. We know people are going off to the Middle East. Why? Because they can, and there's no real incentive to stay. Go back to that old argument people had over the Laffer curve, that element whereby if your taxation was going over 50% of your income, you spent a lot more time actually trying to make sure you're not going to be paying more tax. If it was below 50%, what we found was actually people tolerated it and didn't mind paying tax. It was okay. So don't make taxation the evil thing. Turn it round. Make creation of wealth the positive thing. As a result of that, you will get more tax income and not the other way around.
Another interesting story that's come out is that foreign takeovers of UK companies have shot up by 74% in just the last year. The deals are now worth $142 billion. Now, on the face of it, you might think, oh, that's good, foreign direct investment coming into the UK, but that also means that we have less of our own assets that we're in control of, and it also has ramifications for our stock exchange, doesn't it?
This is a key element indeed. If you're just merely having companies which have been on the market and are then actually being taken over or being aggressively attacked by hedge fund managers with short sellers and things, that can be actually very dangerous for not just the economy, but obviously for the market. What you want to be able to have is the market being seen as go back to the basics of it. It is the primary purpose is to raise capital for business in the most cost-effective manner possible. That's it. And it has to go out and market itself as a market. It doesn't do any of those sort of things at all. We've got companies which we're setting up lots of new companies, that's fine. We then have a shortfall in terms of systems for be able to get secondary capital coming in. We rely upon private equity and those areas, but they're short term. They rely on actually just loading up more debt. But then we've got successful tech companies coming through, and they don't necessarily get taken up by the private equity, but they'll find overseas buyers coming in saying, come and join me in Silicon Valley. It's nicer over there, and you'll get paid more. And so again, it's the Treasury and also the government not understanding actually how you grow that economy by growing those businesses and nurturing those businesses to get to the next stage. And it's almost as though people say, well, they're going to do that anyway. No, they need help and nurturing and making sure they've got a taxation system which is encouraging for investment and developing, which is encouraging for people both domestically and internationally to participate in it. And so if you've got companies coming in, you've got money, the basic bricks are there. Unfortunately, it's the person using the cement, which is pretty poor at the moment in terms of economic policy, and actually how you actually learn how to lay bricks together. And so it's that lack of knowledge and understanding, and almost that everyone else is an enemy. No, you're all against me, as opposed to saying, right, help me. How best can we actually try and solve this? This is not just playing party politics. This is really getting onto the key element of the logic of running an economy for the benefit of everybody, every citizen in this country.
I don't want to be alarmist, but do we not risk becoming an economic colony if this continues?
Well, there's a lovely old Genesis album years ago, Selling England by the Pound. And that's somehow what it feels like. When you actually look around our businesses and you suddenly realise that actually they're not owned by people in the UK anymore, they're owned by, and nothing wrong with them, but say Canadian pension funds who've got a very good track record for long-term investing. But the benefit for it is going to those people in the Canadian pension funds. Why can't we be doing this? And again, it comes back to the point of no one's really actually been telling the pension trustees what else can they be doing with their money. But also down to actually not just pensioners, but investors, but also members of the public, having a greater understanding of how economics can actually benefit everybody, and not just playing silly party politics with old slogans of, go and squeeze the wealth because they've got more money. Well, actually, what you find, of course, is it's the top 10% of the economy. Of the employees actually cover more than 70% of the tax take. So that's what you want to encourage. You need more wealthy people, not less. If we go back to a bit of history, back in 1945, there were 45 stock exchanges in this country. Now, most of them pretty inefficient. I'm not suggesting we go back to ideas of more markets with silly gits and red braces shouting at each other. But we know there was much more regional investment, local money going into local businesses. That's how AIM was started in Glasgow, precisely for that. So for very, very basic software, actually it was three software game companies. They're only raising a few £100,000. It was raised locally for those businesses. They were very successful, tiny things, and they, in due course, were bought up by a larger gaming company. But it showed actually how that was going to operate easily. But it was shut down by the London Stock Exchange, who are only interested in London and large international companies. And that's where the big bucks were, as far as they're concerned, as opposed to the economic thought of saying, right, how do you make the whole country wealthier, and not just focusing on just the city of London and a small number of people just running those funds.
And I wonder if you can tell me a little bit about how a lot of the policies that we've been making in the Western world, in Europe in general, are riding on the idea that, our government debt doesn't matter too much. The way our economies are structured, being on an unsustainable plane, don't matter too much because AI is going to come and sweep through the economy and lift all boats. Do you have much faith in that? And also, there's talk of maybe the AI dream already coming crashing down and the investment bubble with it.
But I find it astonishing with AI. Suddenly, everyone has become an expert in AI when actually an awful lot of people probably can't even spell it, particularly those who pontificate on it. Is AI just merely a mechanism of just an enhanced Google system of actually just going around the internet, gathering information for you? That's not what AI is about. That's just an enhancement of Google. AI can be transformative for businesses in terms of making them much more efficient and productive, not having to deal with the basic elements of operating a business, just in terms of whether it's the accounting or the financing structures, just the daily paperwork. And people say, that means we're going to be losing our jobs. Well, hang on, we would have had that same conversation when people invented the steam engine, and or the spinning jenny and all those sort of things. No. If the economy and companies are growing and more successful, actually they will find that they will actually spin out more areas where they need more people to work. AI is an enhancer. The problem at the moment is we haven't really seen the benefits of AI coming through that people can say this has actually significantly changed the way I do my business. You're going to see more of it coming through because there are more consultancies coming up who will be advising on AI, and that'll very quickly then show up those people who actually just, I'm afraid, excuse the term, bullshitting us about actually how much they know about it, opposed to those who are saying, this has transformed my business by taking X amount of costs out of this and allows me now to deploy more money, more time, and potentially more people in doing more productive earning work.
And to finish off, obviously, 2026, the new year is coming. Are there any financial stories? Are there anything that you're going to be keeping your eye on for the new year?
Sort of a slight surfeit of stories, I suspect we've got to be looking at everything from politics. Because you think in the past year we've got wars going on around the world, and yet apparently that's all fine. We're taking no notice of that. We've had, in terms of financial probity of certain companies and individuals, and the behaviour of certain regulators, yet apparently that hasn't been an issue either. And also in terms of growth. People sort of say, well, we can happily exist at low levels of growth like this. I'm afraid people are deluding themselves. What I really want to see is someone being excited about the opportunities for it, and excited in terms of saying, right, what buttons can we actually press to get change? The primary button to look at will be the technology change, which includes AI, and will allow more things to be done faster in a more productive manner. We're very good at that in this country. We've got those hubs which are already producing these things. Let's have more focus on those and ask them what do they need, not just to keep their business going as it is, to get to the next stage, their next growth area. And unfortunately, people then turn around to people with groups like the CBI, who represent the old corporates and things like that. I'm afraid that's not going to be helping anything at all. The market and the economy has changed radically. And with that, we have to try and change. The good news is actually for investors, never had so much choice. But you're going to have to learn more to actually understand the right ways to actually invest and make sure you manage your risk. but also just make sure that you greater understanding of good companies, bad companies. I find it fascinating here where the end of the year where we had gold and silver suddenly being rocketing up. Isn't that great? That's, to me, is a source of concern. Why? Because people are now worried that I'm having to go back to a lump of gold that doesn't give me any dividend at all. You can look at it, stare at it, lick it. That's about it. It's not going to do anything for you. But stock markets, despite the concern, have actually done really rather well. That's actually masking the underlying issues that actually we are not seeing money going into new businesses to see them grow and develop. And barely buying gold ain't going to make us any wealthier. And in fact, actually, with some of our politicians, like a certain Mr. Brown, all those years ago, managed to sell our gold, high portion of our gold reserves off at the lowest point of the market. Good heavens. I mean, people sort of look upon these people and saying they don't understand what's going on. He couldn't even trade gold at the right price. And so I'm afraid we're doing it all over again.
To
But
to pick you up on that, Christine Lagarde, the ECB chief, she actually said last week that there are signs that confidence in the dollar is starting to wane, and that is accompanying this rush to gold. And I wondered if you had any thoughts on the dollar.
I think it's fascinating. There are going to be a lot of people looking at the Trump administration and the amount of increased borrowing that's going on and the funding of all of that. Yes, and we've had various very successful fund managers turning around saying, actually, we're now going to be doing 20% in gold. 20% in gold? That's a huge proportion. That merely is showing they have no confidence in where businesses or the economies are going. So I'm going to sit on this old thing, which was around at the days of Cleopatra. And it hasn't really changed very much after that. But instead of actually saying, right, I don't have enough, I have the confidence to actually invest in areas that are going to be growing. So I'm afraid that worries me a very great deal. It sounds good in the short term. Well done, having some gold, it's gone up. It hasn't grown the economy. It hasn't employed more people. It hasn't made anybody wealthier, apart from those people who just happen to own that gold.
Have you bought gold though?
Actually, I haven't. No, in the past, I actually have in some of my portfolios. There is a proportion of gold, but it's always been about 4 or 5%. But personally, I rather have invest in a business I can understand, and which is not always the case because they can be quite complicated. But also providing a return, not just in the share price, but in something as old-fashioned as a dividend, compounding over time. And if I can get 4, 5, 6% return and build that up over time, I can know how often my money will be doubling, not just for my lifetime, but the family's lifetime, and actually building that long-term wealth. And that's what we need to be doing, not just for us as individuals and families, but also for the country. Where is our sovereign wealth fund, which is actually taking long-term investment choices to actually make ourselves more efficient? A classic example of this is why would anyone run a steel company in Britain where you pay 20% more for electricity here than virtually anywhere else? So, of course, you're not going to start a company when you've got to have that then. So what's the government doing about that? Well, it's taken donkey's years to suddenly realise we've got to try and reform and change it. And, of course, they haven't got the money to do it anyway now. But that's what I find so frustrating. This is amateur finance run by, frankly, amateur politicians who are not acting responsibly for the benefit of us, who are the citizens of the country.
Well, Justin, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.